We're entering into what's called the transitional period. We're moving from the archaic into the classical, and these things, historians love to set a solid date. For example, 480 is the transition from archaic into classical. However, if you were living in Greece at the time, you wouldn't have suddenly crossed a line and gone, oh wow, I've entered the classical world. It would have been an evolution over the period of a couple of generations. And that's part of what we're seeing here at the Temple of Aphaia. So this is built around 500, 490 BCE, right around the end of the Archaic. And this is important because it reflects the revolutionary and evolutionary changes that we see in the period. It's dedicated to a local goddess by the name of Aphaia. And it's much more compact than the structure that we saw, for example, in the Temple of Hera I. The columns are more widely spaced and they are more slender. They're getting more confident with their abilities. The capitals create a smooth transition to the horizontal architecture above. And instead of columns down the middle of the cella, we see a double colonnade. So over here, there we go. We see 2 rows of columns, which gets rid of that problem of where do you put the cult statue, because you can put the cult statue smack in the middle of the 2 rows, allowing for the statue to be on the central axis, a single entrance, and allowing that good view of the cult statue. Both of the pediments were filled with life-size statuary, with similar subject and composition, both of them including the Trojan War with Athena at the center. Athena larger than the other figures because she is a god. And all figures are more or less the same scale, leaving out Athena, who is, of course, larger. And this is accomplished through pose, leaning, falling, kneeling, and lying down. So here we see the 2 pediments. Now, the interesting thing about the pediments is that these are done at different times. There's actually a 10-year gap between the 2 of them, which means we see this evolution taking place between the 2 pieces. And you can see, just looking at them, that they are very, very similar in terms of their form and story. So we're going to start with the West Pediment, where we're going to see this piece about 500, 490, and this is a dying warrior. The composition tends to highlight stylistic changes. So what we're seeing is something that is definitely archaic here. The holes that you see up here are because he would have worn bronze armor, and that armor would have run across his body, so those are drill holes to attach it. And he has a spear through his chest, but interestingly, he also looks like he's trying to win over anyone who happens to be walking by. Hey, how's it going? I'm just dying here. Look at me in my sort of relaxed pose, a little awkward on the legs, but nothing unusual. The body is very realistic. It is what we expect of the late Archaic, and he's smiling at us, which is awkward because most people, when they're dying, aren't usually smiling. However, when we move to the the East Pediment, the newer pediment, what we see is about 10 years later, this depiction of a dying warrior. Now, 2 dying warriors, they should be fairly similar, but we see a massive evolution. Here, he looks like he's dying. He's also got the drill holes for the armor. And you can see that a spear or something had pierced his chest. But here, instead of looking at the viewer, what he's doing is he's looking down, because usually when you're dying, you're not sitting there going, hey viewer, how's it going? You're more focused on the whole dying part, or not dying, as it may be. And his left arm seems to be hanging from that shield. Again, like he's letting himself slowly to the ground. He's already suffering. He doesn't want to jam this thing further into his chest, and he's holding on to the spear, probably contemplating pulling it out or trying to pull it out, hoping that maybe he'll be able to survive. What we have is a much more natural and complex posture when we look at that East Pediment. The expression matches the action. He's interested in his pain rather than the viewer. And this is much more classical. The statues are moving in a direction where they start to possess a sense of self-consciousness, the sort of thing we would expect in a real human. And so what they're doing is not just creating body forms that are realistic, but trying to create emotion, trying to create movement that is going to be more realistic in their sculpture. And of course, that will allow them to pursue the idealism later on. And we're going to see this development of emotion in sculpture over the next chapter, really over the entirety of the Greeks. The Romans will borrow from it later on.